stainless steel table was colder than Winter Creek water, slick beneath the pads of Max's worn gray paws. The overhead light was harsh, too bright for a place where hearts cracked open every hour. In the quiet hum of Willow Creek Veterinary Hospital, Max, the old German shepherd, lay on a faded blue towel, his body stretched out, chest rising in shallow, uneven waves. Rain patted the window, tracing rivers across glass blurred by fingerprints, memories of worried hands. The hallway outside echoed with distant barks and a nurse's shoes squeaking over linoleum, but in room 3, the world had narrowed to a single, trembling moment. 2 vet techs hovered close. One, Jordan, tried not to meet Max's eyes. She'd clipped his nails 100 times through the years, always with a gentle scratch behind his ears, a joke about how he was the only dog who never barked when the clippers came out. Now her fingers shook as she prepared the catheter. The other, Lucas, busied himself laying out syringes, checking labels twice, glancing at the clock too often. Dr. Larson entered quietly, a man whose hair had gone salt and pepper from 1,000 goodbyes. He knelt beside Max, stroking the dog's thick ruff, speaking softly, almost reverently. "Hey, old man, you ready to rest? You've done enough. More than enough." His voice faltered, just a little, just enough. The air felt different, charged, like the hush before a storm, or the moment you see blue lights flicker in the rearview mirror and know something big is about to change. Lucas drew up the euthanasia solution, amber fluid swirling in the vial. Jordan steadied Max's foreleg, searching for a vein beneath the thinning fur. The preparation was routine. The routine was unbearable. Dr. Larson addressed the room, his voice barely above a whisper. Max's kidneys have failed completely. He's in pain. The arthritis. He can't even get up anymore. He looked at Jordan, then Lucas, then down at the sleeping dog. He's not really here anymore. It's time. But Max was there, present in a way that defied the body's decline. His cloudy brown eyes opened slowly, gaze drifting past the humans, past the walls, toward some memory or promise only he could see. His nose twitched, searching for a scent lost in the antiseptic air. His tail did not wag, but the tip quivered. Barely. Lucas tried to steady his hands, and Jordan blinked away tears. Dr. Larson nodded, and Lucas began to inject the sedative. That was when Max did something no one expected. From deep within his chest, past the ravages of age and pain, he drew breath, a long, rattling inhale that filled his ribcage like a bellows. Then, a howl burst out of him, low, guttural, haunting. Not a bark, not a whine, but something ancient and wild. The sound seemed to vibrate the table, the walls, the very air itself. Everyone froze. The syringe slipped in Lucas's hand. Jordan's mouth fell open. The howl didn't sound like pain. It sounded like longing, like a question. It echoed off metal and tile, spilled under the crack of the exam room door, traveled down the hallway, and out into the wet, waiting night. It was a cry for someone, or something that none of them could name. Dr. Larson straightened, eyes wide. "Did you hear that? I've never—" He shook his head, lost for words. Jordan stepped back, chills running up her arms. Who's he calling for?" No one answered. But in that room, every heart seemed to beat a little harder, as if they'd all been summoned by that howl, pulled for a moment out of their own heads and routines, reminded that some bonds outlast words, outlast even the body itself. Max's howl faded, echoing away like thunder across a valley. He let his head drop back to the towel, eyes half shut. His chest shuddered once, and then settled into shallow, watchful breaths. Lucas cleared his throat. Should I keep going?" His voice was thin, uncertain. Dr. Larson put a hand on his shoulder. Wait." Rain hit the glass harder. Lightning flickered somewhere distant. Max's fur, still thick and golden beneath the gray, bristled slightly, as if he felt something shifting in the air. There was a sense in the room, an unspoken pause, as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone to arrive. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly. Outside, the parking lot glowed beneath halogen lights. Inside, 3 people stood transfixed by a dog, who should have already been gone, who was calling out into the world for a presence none of them understood. Dr. Larson turned down the light, casting the room in a gentler glow. "Let's give it a minute." No one moved. The world outside faded away, until there was nothing but the sound of rain, the soft rhythm of Max's breathing, and the lingering echo of his howl, a sound full of hope and hunger and memory, reaching for someone on the other side of time. In that silence, even the staff, hardened by years of heartbreak, felt the pull of something larger, a mystery that could not be written off as medical, or practical, or even human. A question hovered in the stillness: what or who was Max waiting for? And as the minutes passed, the answer seemed to draw closer, threading its way through storm and darkness toward the glowing, silent room where Max waited, not quite ready to let go. In the far corner of Maplewood Hospice, the world shrank to the size of a single bed and the hush of old machines. The TV on the wall was muted, showing the same loop of small-town news. Rain hit the window here, too, softer, more tired. Outside, a wind chimes banged against the siding, out of rhythm with the beeping monitor by the bed. Grace Sullivan, once Fire Captain Sullivan, lay beneath a faded red blanket, her old department's color, the patch nearly worn to threads. Her silver hair was swept neatly against her pillow, but her skin was translucent, thin as the paper charts. The nurses scribbled on. Her breath came slow, steady, not labored, but hollow, as if each inhale remembered another and another, but now struggled to keep the pattern going. 2 nurses stood outside the room, voices low, their silhouettes flickering in the crack of the doorway. "She hasn't said a word since Sunday," whispered one, a woman with sad brown eyes. "Family thinks she's not there anymore." "I heard she used to run into burning houses," the other replied. "I guess we all slow down, don't we?" The old man sitting by the window, her brother, Vince, kept silent. He'd been there every day, watching Grace slip away, inch by inch. His hands trembled around a styrofoam cup, half empty, coffee gone cold hours ago. He didn't bother with hope anymore. He measured her days by the slow retreat of color from her cheeks and the heaviness in her eyelids. The room felt stale. The only movement was the slow tick of the wall clock and the rise and fall of Grace's chest. Pictures cluttered the nightstand. One of Grace in her fire helmet, grinning, an old Polaroid of her with her crew, and a young German shepherd at her feet. Max, tongue lolling, tail wagging. Max, back when his muzzle was dark and his eyes were sharp with mischief. Most days now, even Grace seemed to have forgotten the world outside this bed. But somewhere past noon, as the sky darkened and thunder rumbled over the hills, something happened. It was so faint at first that only Grace seemed to sense it. A pressure in the air, a vibration through the bones. Vince sat up, eyes narrowed, as if he felt the shift, but couldn't name it. The rain picked up, thumping in hard bursts against the glass. Down the hall, a nurse paused, head tilted, hearing what sounded like a dog's howl, carried far and thin through phone lines, radio static, or some memory that surfaced for no reason at all. In room 208, Grace's fingers twitched. The monitor spiked. A tiny peak, so slight it could have been a blip. Vince glanced over, startled. Grace's lips moved, barely, as if chasing a word up from a dream. Then she whispered, so soft he almost missed it, "Max." Vince leaned in, thinking maybe it was a mistake, a ghost sound. But Grace's hand curled into a fist, nails pressing into her palm, face pulling together with a focus he hadn't seen in weeks. Her eyes, faded blue and watery, opened a crack. She stared through Vince, through the nurses, through the hospital wall, as if she could see a road stretching out of town, rain sweeping over the old firehouse, down Main Street, all the way to the doors of Willow Creek Veterinary Hospital. For a moment, she was back there, not as a patient, but as a captain. The fire alarm blaring, men and women scrambling into gear, Max by her side, barking at the siren. That bond was always more than dog and handler. It was something older, deeper, a code she'd never spoken aloud. She'd carried Max out of burning houses, and he'd dragged her from falling debris. More than once, she'd sworn she'd heard his voice, if not in words, then in the rumble of his chest against hers. Grace tried to sit up, her body slow to obey. Pain arched through her back, sharp and mean. She gritted her teeth, fighting for the strength to move. Vince reached for her shoulder, but she shook him off. "Nurse," he called, voice trembling. "Nurse, she's awake." The brown-eyed nurse rushed in, her face bright with hope and confusion. Grace's lips were blue, her breath shallow, but her eyes were alive again. "I need to see Max," she croaked, the effort immense, her voice rough as gravel. "Now? Take me to him." The nurse tried to soothe her. "Grace, you're not well. You need to rest. Max isn't—" Grace shook her head, a stubbornness flickering in her eyes. "No, I have to go. Now, before it's too late." The words shocked the nurse into stillness. Vince stood, mouth open. He hadn't heard that note of command in her voice in months. But Grace, it's storming, and the nurse started, but Grace cut her off with a look. Fierce, clear, the same look that had gotten grown men out of burning houses and children off rooftops. "If I don't go, I won't make it anyway," Grace whispered. "I won't make it without him?" Her breathing grew rougher, but her will burned bright. The nurse pressed the call button, frantic, calling for the doctor. Vince hovered beside the bed, unsure if he was witnessing a miracle or the last surge before the end. The hospice doctor, a tall, kind-faced woman named Dr. Rivers, arrived. She assessed Grace quickly, concern etched in every line of her face. "Grace, I know he means the world to you, but this trip could be too much. You might not make it through." Grace's reply was raw, direct. "If I stay here, I'm already gone." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, as if on cue, another figure appeared at the door. Daniel Soto, an off-duty EMT, shoulders broad, eyes tired but bright. He'd once been a rookie under Grace's command, years ago. He'd heard the commotion, sensed something was different. "I'll drive her," Daniel said, "whatever it takes." Vince looked at the young man, then at Grace, and for the first time all week, he felt something like hope. A reckless, impossible hope. The staff scrambled into action. They phoned Willow Creek, explained the situation. Arrangements were made for a private, silent ambulance. A favor owed, a rule bent in honor of all Grace had given. Grace refused her meds, insisted she wanted to be clear-headed for this. Daniel and Vince helped her into a wheelchair, tucking her in tight beneath the old firehouse blanket. The rain battered the van's windshield as Daniel loaded her in. He glanced in the rear view, seeing Grace's reflection, eyes fierce, jaw set, hands curled tight around the faded fabric. She was fragile, yes, but every inch still a captain, every heartbeat still tethered to a promise. As the engine turned over, Grace shut her eyes and murmured, not to Vince or Daniel, but to the storm and to Max, wherever he was. "I'm coming. Hold on for me, boy." In the hospice room, the monitors slowed again. The rain hammered on, and the nurses stared at the empty bed, feeling like they'd just watched someone step off the edge of the world. In the hush that followed, the story of Grace Sullivan and her German Shepherd was not yet over. It was gathering itself, coiling for one last impossible rescue. The ambulance cut through the night like a promise. Rain came down in sheets, washing the streets clean, pooling in the gutters, beating a wild tattoo on the ambulance roof. Inside, the light was low and blue and full of unspoken urgency. Daniel gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, face set with the quiet resolve of someone who'd learned a thing or two from Grace Sullivan in his rookie days. The dashboard glowed, wipers slashed back and forth, barely keeping up. Each red light was a test, each stop sign a dare. He rolled the warrant through them anyway, careful, fast, but never reckless. In the back, Grace lay strapped to the gurney, upright as much as the seatbelt would allow. The firehouse blanket was tucked around her like a shield. Vince rode beside her, holding her hand. His thumb drew slow circles across her knuckles, a small, steadying ritual from childhood that neither had spoken about in years. Grace's eyes were half shut, but every muscle in her jaw was tense, straining against the weakness in her limbs. Her breath rattled. She hated the smell of the ambulance. Disinfectant, rubber gloves, fear, but she kept her chin up and her mouth set in a straight line. Outside, the siren was off. Daniel had insisted on quiet, not wanting to spook Grace or the stormy night. "Doing okay back there, Cap?" Daniel called, glancing up at the rearview mirror. Grace's voice was a croak, but it held a note of fire. "Drive like you mean it, rookie." Vince let out a shaky laugh, the first real one in days. Daniel grinned, the tension in his shoulders loosening just enough to push the pedal a little harder. They sped past shuttered shops, the old movie theater with its letters missing from the marquee, the church steeple outlined in lightning. The world outside looked like a memory of every late-night call Grace had ever answered. Empty streets, danger thick in the air, something waiting at the other end. Inside the ambulance, the silence was heavy. Vince fought the urge to speak, to fill the air with worry or comfort. He watched Grace, watched her eyes flicker open and closed, watched the pulse jump at her neck. He could see she was somewhere else, half in the present, half in some other time, some other fire. Grace's mind drifted, the boundaries between past and present gone thin as paper. She saw Max, his tail wagging in the firehouse kitchen, his teeth bared in play as he yanked a towel from a rookie's belt, his steady presence by her side in the thickest smoke. Once, she'd pulled a boy out of a burning house, lungs full of soot, arms numb with exhaustion. Max had dragged her by the sleeve, back to the light. She owed him everything. More than that, she owed him this. Suddenly, her body lurched with pain. A white-hot stab shot down her side, sharp enough to make her gasp. Vince leaned close, alarm in his voice. "Grace, you okay?" Grace gripped his hand, knuckles white. "Don't stop," she managed. "Not until we get there. Don't let them stop for anything." Daniel's eyes flashed in the mirror, and he pressed the gas harder. "We're almost there. Just hang on, Cap. Just hang on." Outside, thunder shook the ambulance. Branches scraped the roof as they tore down Old Willow Road. Floodwater splashed up in brown arcs, drenching the ambulance's sides. Grace could barely see out the window, but she didn't need to. She knew the way. She'd driven it herself 100 times, in daylight and in firelight, with Max riding shotgun, nose pressed to the wind. As the minutes crawled, Vince checked his watch, over and over, anxiety tightening around his ribs. He'd never felt so helpless. He squeezed Grace's hand and whispered, "He's going to wait for you, sis. He always did." Grace smiled, a real small smile, then shut her eyes, drawing in a breath that sounded almost peaceful. In the front, Daniel reached over and flipped on the radio. Static filled the cab, then faded into a low, solemn country song, the kind Grace used to hum in the truck after a long call. He felt her presence behind him, a weight and a blessing, as if she was already a legend sitting beside him. Back at Willow Creek Veterinary Hospital, the mood had shifted. The staff was on edge, haunted by Max's howl. Jordan lingered in the hallway, arms folded tight against her chest, unable to shake the sound from her memory. Dr. Larson checked the clock every 2 minutes. The sedative syringe sat untouched, condensation blooming on the barrel. Lucas paced by the supply closet, muttering, "This doesn't feel right. Like we're waiting for something." Max, for his part, was still. His chest rose and fell, shallow but steady. His eyes flickered beneath half-closed lids. Every few moments his ears twitched, searching, listening, alert. He didn't seem afraid. He seemed expectant, as if counting down the heartbeats until someone arrived. In a small room behind the desk, Jordan picked up the phone and called the front desk at Maplewood Hospice, hoping for news. "Are they on their way?" she asked, voice trembling. "They left 10 minutes ago," came the reply. "She's awake. She's, fighting like she always did." Jordan hung up, her heart hammering. She walked to the exam room, stood in the doorway, and watched Max breathe, feeling as though she was witnessing a kind of Miracle. The room felt suspended in time. Back in the ambulance, Grace's pain grew sharp again. Daniel glanced back, concern in his voice. Almost there, Cap. Can you hear me? Grace forced her eyes open. She stared straight at him through the mirror, her gaze burning with the force of all her years. Don't slow down, she said. Not now. The wipers slapped at the storm. The world outside was chaos, but inside that ambulance, it was only one thing: the distance between Grace and Max, closing inch by inch. Vince glanced at his sister, voice raw. Why him, Grace? Why now? She blinked slow, the answer simple as breath. Because love doesn't know how to quit, Vince, not when it counts. The ambulance swung into the parking lot of Willow Creek. Red and blue lights reflected off puddles, shimmering across wet pavement. Daniel pulled up to the side entrance, jumped out into the rain, and raced to open the back doors. Inside, Grace braced herself. She felt weak, bones hollow, but when the doors opened and the night air hit her face, she drew on every ounce of will she had left. Vince and Daniel helped her into the wheelchair. She gripped the firehouse blanket, set her jaw, and locked eyes with the hospital doors. Inside, Jordan saw her coming. Her heart leaped. She shouted, "She's here! They made it!" Dr. Larson rushed to prepare the exam room, staff scattered, clearing the hallway, making space. The tension built, or almost unbearable. As Daniel wheeled Grace inside, water pooling at her feet, time seemed to slow. For everyone in that moment, it wasn't just a trip to the vet. It was something else. A reckoning, a reunion, a final stand against the only enemy left, time itself. And as Grace looked down the hall and heard, faint but undeniable, the soft thump of a German shepherd's tail against a metal table, she felt her own heart answer. She was almost there, just a few feet, just a few breaths more. Inside, Max waited, and the world, for a heartbeat, waited too. The ambulance doors banged shut behind them, the echo sharp against the hum of the storm. Daniel's shoes squeaked as he pushed Grace's wheelchair up the short ramp, water dripping off his coat. Vince hovered, one hand on the back of the chair, the other fisted in his jacket pocket as if holding on to something he couldn't name. Inside Willow Creek Veterinary Hospital, the air was thick, somewhere between a hospital's hush and a church's awe. Nurses parted, eyes wide. And for a moment, the only sound was the clatter of wheels and the low rumble of thunder outside. Grace's head lolled, breath ragged. But her eyes found the hallway, found the door at the far end, and narrowed with intent. She was so pale she seemed almost transparent, but the force of her will kept her upright, spine stiff, chin lifted. As they moved, the world slipped out of focus for Grace. The fluorescent lights overhead blurred and buzzed. Each face they passed belonged somehow to both the present and the past. Young, nervous techs flashing into older, familiar faces. Rookies she'd mentored, seasoned firefighters long retired, her father's ghost standing at the entrance to a burning building. It all twisted together, memory and reality, the way pain can turn the present into a dream. Grace gripped the firehouse blanket tighter. The damp wool scratched her fingers, and that roughness anchored her. In her mind, she heard the alarms. Shrill, insistent, the shouts of her team. Max's bark, sharp and certain, always leading her forward. She closed her eyes, and it was as if she was back in that blaze on Reed Street 15 years ago. The flames poured from upstairs windows. The air shimmered with heat. They'd said there was a boy trapped on the second floor. Grace had gone in first. Always first. She could still feel the smoke clawing at her lungs. She stumbled up the stairwell, her gear heavy, vision swimming. Max was beside her, pushing past debris, nose to the ground. She remembered the sudden crash, a burning beam collapsing, the world going sideways, the roar and crush, and the split-second fear that she wouldn't make it out. But then there was Max. Jaws clamped around her sleeve, hauling her back, inch by inch, grunting with the effort, the fire reflecting in his wild, loyal eyes. He'd saved her that night, more than once. The memory flashed away, Grace blinked, and she was back in the hallway, her body older now, weaker, but the feeling the same. A rescue in progress, time running short. Outside the exam room, the staff clustered, faces drawn, voices hushed. "Is she really coming for him?" Jordan whispered to Lucas. Lucas nodded, eyes glistening. "She fought her way out of hospice just to get here. For him." Dr. Larson stood by the door, his hand on the knob, unsure if he was opening a room or letting history walk in. He'd seen animals hold on for loved ones before, but nothing quite like this, nothing with the weight of legend. Inside, Max's vitals had stabilized, mysteriously, impossibly. The monitors had stopped their frantic beeping, settling into a slow, steady rhythm. Jordan, standing by his side, had watched the old dog's ears twitch every time the thunder rolled, watched his eyes flicker open at the faintest sound. It was as if Max was waiting for something only he could sense. Dr. Larson leaned down, his voice soft. "She's on her way, buddy. Just hold on a little longer." Back in the hallway, Daniel stopped the wheelchair just outside the door. He knelt, rain still glistening on his hair. "You ready?" he asked, voice trembling. Grace nodded, unable to speak. Vince squeezed her shoulder, the pressure fierce. "Go to him, sis." Daniel swung the door open. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The sound of rain, the crackle of thunder, the murmur of voices, all fell away. The only thing left was the space between Grace and Max. Grace braced her arms on the wheelchair and forced herself to her feet. It was agony. Her body felt brittle as glass, knees shaking, breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts. But she walked, step by slow, defiant step, into the room. Max's head lifted. His eyes found hers, cloudy but bright, and for a heartbeat, it was as if neither of them had aged at all. His tail thumped, weak but determined. Grace reached out, her fingers trembling, and Max dragged himself forward, paws scraping at the towel. The room went silent, utterly, completely silent. Even the storm outside seemed to wait. Grace dropped to her knees beside the table, heedless of pain. She pressed her palm to Max's muzzle, feeling the coarse fur, the warm breath. He licked her hand, slow, deliberate, as if to reassure her that he was still there, still her partner, still her friend. Dr. Larson stepped back, tears shining in his eyes. "We can wait," he said quietly to the staff. "Let them have this." Outside the room, Daniel and Vince watched through the window, neither able to speak. Grace stroked Max's head, her touch gentle but sure. "Hey, partner," she whispered. "You waited for me. You always do." For a while, they simply breathed together, her hand rising and falling with the rhythm of his chest, his eyes never leaving hers. Time seemed to stretch and bend. The past and present, pain and joy, all collapsed into this moment, sharp and luminous as lightning. Flashbacks flickered in Grace's mind, a montage of all the times she and Max had been side by side, sleeping on the tile floor of the firehouse after a long shift. Max chasing children around the station yard, his bark bright with laughter. The nights they'd cleaned gear together in silence, sharing comfort in the routine. There had always been something wordless between them, a language made of glances and touches, forged in danger and fire and quiet devotion. The room filled with a kind of reverence. Nurses set aside their charts. Phones stayed in pockets. No one took pictures. It felt like trespassing on sacred ground. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, Grace's voice shook with exhaustion, but her will held strong. "I'm here, Max. I'm here." Max pressed his head into her palm and closed his eyes, his breathing slowing, the effort easing. Dr. Larson looked at Jordan, then at Lucas. "He's holding on for her," he murmured, wonder and sadness braided in his voice. The tension in the air coiled tighter. Would Grace have enough time? Would Max? For now, neither seemed to care about the question. All that mattered was the contact, the reunion. In the hush, with the storm as their witness, it felt, for a moment, that the whole world had come to a halt, so that a woman and her dog could say everything they'd never needed words for. Outside, Daniel wiped his eyes on his sleeve, and Vince closed his fists so tight his knuckles blanched. Inside, Grace leaned closer, forehead resting against Max's. She closed her eyes, whispered into his fur. One more rescue, old friend. One more. And as the night pressed in, the rescue of heart, of memory, of love was already underway. The door eased shut behind them, muffling the voices in the hallway, sealing Grace and Max in a private world suspended between past and present, between the brink of goodbye and the raw insistence of one last hello. The air in the exam room was thick with the weight of everything unsaid, heavy with the kind of silence that only love and time can create. Grace steadied herself on the table's edge, knees wobbling but refusing to give out. The firehouse blanket slipped from her lap and pooled at her feet, a faded splash of red on the cold linoleum. Max's breathing had evened out, a soft, rhythmic pulse that seemed almost impossible, given what his body had endured. His tail flicked against the towel, a slow, familiar beat, as if he was drumming out a message only she could understand. The fluorescent lights buzzed, then seemed to dim as Jordan stepped forward, her gaze searching Grace's face. "Do you want a chair?" she asked, voice hushed. Grace shook her head, a stubborn line forming between her brows. "If I sit, I won't stand up again," she rasped, forcing a wry smile. Jordan nodded, stepping back, watching from the margin as the moment unfolded. Dr. Larson hovered in the corner, chart in hand, eyes flicking between Max and Grace. There was a deep, almost reverent quiet among the staff. They'd seen reunions, sure, but not like this. Not with the air so charged. Every glance, every heartbeat stretched tight. Grace leaned in, her face inches from Max's. She studied him as if memorizing every gray hair, every scar and spot. His eyes, once amber bright, now clouded but alert, fixed on hers. For a heartbeat, the years peeled away. He was the eager rookie's dog again, all bristling muscle and boundless energy. She was the captain, young and certain. The world still spread out before her like an open road. But time was a patient thief. She saw the toll in the tremor of Max's paw, in the hitch of his breath. She pressed her hand to his chest and felt the slow, sturdy rhythm of his heart, still strong, still steady, beating for her. A knock at the door. Daniel poked his head in, his face drawn but hopeful. "Need anything?" he asked softly. Grace just shook her head, not looking away from Max. "We're good, kid. Thanks for getting me here." Daniel lingered, searching for words, then nodded, withdrawing quietly. Vince stayed in the hallway, pacing. His own heart hammered in his chest, each step a small prayer. For Grace, for Max, for more time. Inside, Grace took Max's face in her hands, her thumbs brushing over the rough fur of his cheeks. She bent low and whispered, her words tumbling out in a hush. Only he could hear. "I'm sorry I couldn't be here sooner. I tried, Max. I swear I tried." Max's ears twitched. He pushed his head into her hands, his tongue flicking out in a slow, deliberate gesture. Reassurance, forgiveness, gratitude all bound together in the simplicity of touch. The vet techs watched with shining eyes. Lucas discreetly wiped his face on his sleeve. Grace pulled back, searching Max's face for any sign of pain. There was none, only that deep, old knowing. A trust built from 1,000 rescues, 1,000 nights spent side by side. The kind of trust that doesn't waver, even at the end. "Do you remember that fire on Maple?" she whispered, a smile ghosting across her lips. "You were just a pup. You dragged me out by the boot, nearly chewed it off in the process." She let herself laugh, soft, choked, full of memory. Max's tail thumped harder, as if answering. The space between them was thick with memory. Flashbacks shimmered behind Grace's eyelids, and Max leading children away from wreckage, curling beside her on the cold tile of the station, standing guard during storms that rattled the windows. He had been more than a dog. He was a promise kept, a silent oath lived out every day. The emotional tension in the room was palpable. Outside the door, staff and family waited, breaths held, as if afraid to disturb the sacred moment unfolding within. Max's head dropped onto Grace's palm, and for a long stretch, neither moved. They breathed together, slow, patient, in perfect rhythm. Yet, Grace stroked his ears, her hands gentle but insistent, committing every detail to memory. The world shrank to the space between her hand and his heartbeat. A monitor beeped, jarring in the hush. Grace looked up, meeting Dr. Larson's gaze. He stepped forward, his tone gentle. He's stable, Grace. More than I expected. He's waiting for you. Grace nodded, swallowing hard. He always was stubborn. She reached for the firehouse blanket, pulling it up around Max's shoulders, tucking it in just like she'd done on so many cold nights at the station. She brushed the fur back from his eyes, her hands steady, her breath shaky. Max's tail slowed, then stilled. His eyes fluttered, still locked on hers. The room filled with the hush of reverence. Phone stayed silent. No one dared disturb the moment. Even the storm outside seemed to hold its breath, thunder rumbling distant and low. For a moment it was as if nothing could touch them. Not time, not pain, not even the slow creep of loss. Grace pressed her forehead to Max's, eyes closed, letting the warmth of him anchor her in a body that felt too light, too empty. She whispered, "I'm here, boy. I'm not going anywhere." And Max, in the space between breaths, seemed to answer, not with words, but with presence, with loyalty that had never faltered, even at the very end. In the threshold of goodbye, Grace and Max lingered, two souls bound together, refusing to cross over until the other was ready. Outside, Daniel whispered to Vince, "I've never seen anything like this." Vince only nodded, unable to speak, tears streaking silent down his cheeks. In that small, quiet room, the world shifted, just a little. Old pain eased, regret faded. For a heartbeat, everything was exactly as it should be. A woman, her dog, and the fierce, bright tether that no storm could break. And so they waited together, as night deepened, not afraid, not alone, held steady at the threshold, daring time to take even one step further without their say. Time seemed to stop, hanging in the corners of the room like the last bit of fog before sunrise. The storm outside had settled to a steady, whispering rain, tapping at the windows in a way that was more memory than sound. In the exam room, Grace and Max were surrounded by a hush so deep that even the usual hum of hospital machines felt respectful, like a congregation holding its breath. Grace's legs trembled, but she stayed kneeling by the table, her hand resting gently on Max's head. Her fingers combed through the thick, aging fur, each stroke deliberate, almost ceremonial. For so many years, she'd been the strong one, the rescuer, the decision-maker, the one who ran toward trouble. Now she leaned her forehead to Max's, eyes closed, letting herself rest in the safety of his presence. Just this once. The vet staff drifted to the far wall, giving them space, their faces softened by awe and sorrow. Dr. Larson stood back, arms folded, blinking hard, as if fighting the urge to clear his throat and break the spell. The beeping of the heart monitor faded into the background, a steady metronome marking out the closing measures of a song written in loyalty and years. Grace whispered something into Max's fur, her words lost except for the hush of her breath. She pressed her palm to his cheek, feeling the warmth there, and Max, as if summoned, lifted his head just enough to nuzzle into her hand. It was a small thing, a barely there gesture, but it filled the whole room, drew gasps from the onlookers. Even now, after all his body had lost, he found a way to reach her. For a moment, Grace's mind was filled with the memory of nights spent in the firehouse dormitory. Max curled at her side. She remembered the nights after the hardest calls, when she couldn't sleep and the world seemed too heavy, but Max would nudge her with his nose, a simple, silent invitation to keep going. The dog's presence had been her lifeline, the anchor that kept her from drifting out into the darkness. In the room, nothing moved except the slow rise and fall of Max's chest. Grace's eyes shimmered with tears she refused to let fall. Instead, she channeled them into her touch, gentle, certain, unwavering. Jordan, standing with Lucas by the door, whispered, "It's like he was just waiting for her." Lucas nodded, wiping at his eyes. "I've seen animals hold on for people before, but never like this, never with so much purpose." Dr. Larson set his clipboard aside, voice low. He doesn't want to go without her. Not yet. The minutes stretched. Vince pressed his palm to the glass, watching his sister and her dog through the window. Daniel leaned against the wall, arms crossed tight, a lump in his throat that he couldn't swallow away. No one dared disturb them. No one checked their phone. It was as if the air itself was sacred, thick with all the things that had been shared between Grace and Max over the years. The things that never needed to be spoken. Grace lifted her head, looking into Max's eyes. They were old eyes, clouded by time, but burning with a kind of quiet understanding. For a heartbeat, Grace could see everything reflected back at her. The fires, the rescues, the laughter, the shared silences, the way he'd always found her in the dark. She spoke, but the words were softer than a sigh. "You waited for me. Her partner. You always were, the stubborn one." Max's ears twitched, and he tried to lift his head again, this time a little higher, as if he needed her to see that he was still there. His nose pressed against her palm, and he let out a single, deep breath. It wasn't a sigh of pain, but of release, of comfort, of the simple relief of being together one last time. The decision hung in the air. The staff waited for Grace's word, for the signal to continue or to stop. But in that moment, it was clear to everyone that no one could decide except Max and Grace. The moment was theirs, and theirs alone. Dr. Larson, eyes shimmering, stepped forward, clearing his throat gently so as not to startle anyone. "Grace, I can call it off for now. It's your choice. It's his choice. There's no rush." Grace nodded, unable to speak for a long moment. Then she found her voice, hoarse, cracked, but certain. "He's not ready. Not yet. Let him stay. Let him just be with me." Dr. Larson smiled, sad and proud. "Of course." He gently motioned the staff out of the room, closing the door behind them. Alone now, Grace leaned close again. The rain outside sounded farther away, almost unreal. She and Max breathed together, slow, patient, sharing the air, sharing the moment. Time bent around them, and for a little while, there was no pain, no fear, only the presence of an old friend at the very edge of goodbye. Grace stroked Max's muzzle, tracing the familiar scars with her thumb. "I'm here, buddy. I'm not letting go until you're ready." Max closed his eyes, head heavy in her hand. His tail flicked, then stilled. The energy in the room softened, like the moment after a storm breaks and the world is washed clean. Grace whispered one more time, her words almost a prayer. "Thank you, Max, for everything, for all of it." And the silence that followed was not empty, but full of memory, love, and the knowledge that for these two, no goodbye would ever truly be final. Outside, in the hall, Daniel leaned his head against the wall, eyes shut, lips moving in a silent thank you to a dog who had saved his captain more than once. Vince wiped tears from his cheeks, not caring who saw. Inside, Grace and Max stayed like that, two warriors at rest, hearts beating together, holding the line against the coming dawn. And in that holy hush, the world itself seemed to honor their bond, bowing its head, letting them have this sliver of forever before the next breath, the next step, the next and final letting go. In the silence, the air grew thick with memories that swirled and settled like dust in golden sunlight. Grace let her hand rest on Max's head, feeling the thrum of his life through her fingers. Steady and present. Around them, the world seemed to fade to a watercolor wash, edges softening, light bending, time unspooling into something dreamlike, half real, half remembered. Max's breath was shallow now, but his eyes followed Grace's every movement, holding her gaze in a way that seemed to beg her not to turn away, not just yet. It wasn't fear she saw there. It was a fierce, quiet devotion and the gravity of 1,000 shared moments that no ending could erase. Grace's mind drifted, letting herself sink into the long, winding river of their life together. In her memory, Max was always at her side. She remembered nights at the firehouse, the hiss of steam from the coffee pot, men and women trading stories in the break room while Max slept curled at her feet. She'd felt his weight against her boots after every call. Like a silent promise that no matter what happened outside those walls, she was never alone. Her thoughts flickered to summer afternoons in the station's back lot, where kids from the neighborhood would gather, faces sticky with popsicle juice, eyes wide as saucers. Max would run circles around them, barking and dodging, letting the smallest ones throw sticks that he'd return with patient dignity. Sometimes he'd sprawl in the grass, belly up, as half a dozen little hands rubbed his stomach, and Grace would catch herself laughing so hard her ribs hurt. The station had felt like a second family. But it was Max who made it a home. In the quiet of the present, Grace traced his scarred ear with her thumb, recalling how he'd earned it. A barn fire out on Hollow Creek, the roof collapsing just as she'd pulled a trapped farmer free. She'd thought she'd lost him in the smoke, her heart in her throat, until Max burst out, singed but whole, and leapt into her arms. She'd wept that day, not from fear, but from the wild relief that comes when you realize you haven't lost your heart's companion. Now, as she knelt beside him, the hush of the room was its own kind of sacred. She spoke, her voice a low rasp that barely reached the walls. You remember those nights, don't you? How you'd sneak scraps from the kitchen, how you'd nudge my boot when you thought I'd been at the desk too long. Max's tail stirred faintly. His eyes, though cloudy, glimmered in the dim light, as if echoing her words back to her. He made no sound, but Grace heard his answer, in the hush, as clear as if he'd spoken. The hospital staff, Jordan, Lucas, even Dr. Larson, stood outside the glass, faces softened in wonder. A paramedic who'd come in for a late-night check on a friend stood, hat in hand, saying to no one in particular, "I've never seen anything like this. Never seen a dog hold on like that, just for someone's touch." Inside, Grace leaned forward, her tears spilling now, silent and unchecked. She let them fall, not out of grief, but from the weight of gratitude. For every ordinary day Max had walked by her side, for every moment he'd given her more courage than she could ever return. Her memories swelled again. The feel of Max's nose nudging her awake before dawn for morning walks along the river, the way he'd shivered in the snow, but refused to turn back, until she did. She saw herself scrubbing gear late into the night, Max stretched beside her, chin resting on her boot, both of them comforted by the steady rhythm of work and presence. For a heartbeat, she was young again, sprinting across the firehouse yard, Max at her side, both of them unburdened, untouchable, the world wide open. For another, she was older, watching Max's muzzle turn silver, his steps slow, but his devotion as sharp as ever. The years had wound through them, but love had never loosened its grip. A nurse stepped quietly into the room, bringing water, but Grace waved her away, unwilling to break the spell. The nurse hesitated, then left, the door clicking gently behind her. Grace stroked Max's side, feeling his breath shudder beneath her palm. She whispered, "It's okay, boy. I'm here. I'll stay as long as you need." Outside the room, the storm had dwindled to a drizzle. The town beyond the hospital was hushed, as if holding vigil for a story most would never know. Inside, the staff and a few stray visitors gathered in the hallway, drawn by the sense that something rare was happening, something they might never witness again. No one took out their phone. No one dared break the moment with a lens. The weight of reverence settled over them all, a collective sense that some endings were too sacred to capture. Grace's fingers trembled as she remembered the day she'd retired, the day she'd turned her badge and helmet in, Max trotting out of the station at her side. They'd walked the long way home, the sky streaked with sunset, Grace's heart heavy with the ache of leaving behind her calling, but lighter for knowing she would never walk alone. She leaned close, her lips at Max's ear, her words a vow. "I'm not afraid, Max. Not as long as you're with me. You've always been the brave one." Max's eyes fluttered closed, a soft whine barely escaping his throat, a sound not of pain, but of contentment, as if he was telling her he understood and that he was ready when she was. The room was quiet, the only witness to a lifetime spun from courage, loyalty, and the kind of love that survives everything except the last goodbye. Outside, Jordan pressed her hand to the glass, whispering, "Let them have this. No one needs to see more. Some things are just meant to be felt." As the minutes passed, Grace and Max breathed together. Two souls tethered through storm and memory, through fire and quiet, through every loss and every rescue. The staff and bystanders watched, awestruck, as the boundaries between this world and whatever came next seemed to grow thinner, the veil lifting just enough to glimpse the true shape of love. And in that silence, more eloquent than words, Grace and Max lingered, held in the glow of all they'd been and all they'd given each other, until time itself bent to honor their bond. Night settled deeper around Willow Creek Veterinary Hospital, a gentle darkness pressing in on rain-streaked windows. The storm had spent itself, leaving the world washed and strangely quiet, as if even the weather understood that some moments required stillness. In the soft lamplight, Grace sat on a stool beside Max's table, her fingers tracing slow, steady lines through the coarse fur at his neck. The firehouse blanket draped across her lap, warm with the memory of 1,000 rescues. The air in the room felt heavy and close, carrying the weight of everything that had been shared, every word and silence that had passed between them. Even the hospital machines had quieted, their blinking lights casting soft blue and green patterns on the ceiling, like northern lights in miniature, shimmering over this small, sacred space. Grace's breathing was uneven now, each inhale thinner than the last, each exhale an effort she refused to show. Her hand never left Max, not for a second. She watched the rise and fall of his chest, slower now, the pauses between breaths growing longer. The hush was complete. No phones, no chatter, no more medical instructions. Just two lives, side by side at the border of something neither could name. Hey, she leaned in, her lips trembling as she pressed them to Max's brow. Her voice was just a breath. "It's okay, but buddy, I'll be right behind you. You don't have to wait for me anymore." The words lingered in the room, sinking in like rain on thirsty earth. Max's ears twitched at her voice. His eyes found hers, soft and shining, so full of trust that it almost broke her. His head was heavy in her palm, his body limp but unafraid. Grace saw it in the set of his jaw, in the way his tail gave a single, final thump. A signal, maybe, that he'd been waiting for her permission to let go. Her memory rushed with images. Max as a puppy, nose smudged with dirt, paws too big for his body. Max in the firehouse yard, barking at passing trucks, fearless and eager. Max racing into smoke and flame, hauling her out when her legs gave way. Max beside her on long, lonely nights, sharing the silence in a way only the truest friend could. The montage flickered in her mind, scenes bright and sharp as lightning, then faded, leaving only the warmth of his body pressed to hers. The staff watched from outraged, tears on their cheeks, hands clasped or pressed to lips. Even the bystanders, paramedics, janitors, a mother with her child in the waiting room, stood silent, united in reverence. None of them had witnessed a moment quite like this, a letting go that was so full of love, it seemed to bind the air itself. Grace stroked Max's muzzle, feeling the rough, familiar bristles, the shallow, fluttering breaths. She felt him slipping, sensed the soft loosening of his grip on the world. She knew, the way only someone deeply connected knows, that the end was near. She did not fight it, nor try to pull him back. She had always promised him a good death, a goodbye, wrapped in love, not fear. She whispered, "Thank you, Max, for staying, for everything. Max blinked slowly, and his gaze drifted past her, seeing perhaps the long grass of the firehouse yard or the shimmer of water on the river at dawn. Grace saw his muscles relax, his mouth fall open just a touch, the last exhale trembling out of him in a sigh as gentle as a sleeping child. He grew still. His chest did not rise again. For a heartbeat, time hung motionless, as if refusing to let go of the moment. The only sound was the rain's soft hush, the sound of Grace's shaky breath, and then silence. A hush fell so complete that it was not filled with sadness, but with awe. A room full of people bearing witness to something holy. No one moved. No one dared disturb the peace that had settled over the old German shepherd, his head resting in Grace's palm, his story written to the very last word. Grace stayed that way, eyes closed, one hand stroking Max's fur, her forehead pressed to his. She let herself feel the shape of the grief, sharp and raw, but shot through with gratitude. She had known loss before, on the job, in the line of duty, but never like this. This was the kind of loss that remade a person, the kind that was as much a celebration as it was a letting go. Outside, Jordan wiped her eyes, hugging Lucas close. Dr. Larson leaned against the wall, whispering a prayer under his breath for a dog who'd served so well, and for the woman who'd loved him fiercely. Daniel turned away, pressing his knuckles to his mouth, not ashamed of his tears. Inside, Grace finally lifted her head. She ran her hand down Max's back one last time, lingering at his tail, feeling the absence where there once was a heartbeat. She looked at him, her partner, her protector, her truest companion, and she found that she could smile through her tears. She whispered, "You did good, Max. Rest easy, old boy. I'll take it from here." She sat quietly beside him, letting the world turn around them, letting the weight of the moment anchor her in place. There was pain, yes, but there was also relief and pride and a kind of deep, quiet peace that came from knowing nothing had been left unsaid or done. After a while, the staff returned, their movements gentle and respectful. Jordan reached for Grace's shoulder, offering silent comfort. Dr. Larson checked Max's heart with his stethoscope, nodding with reverence, his voice breaking as he spoke. He's gone. Peacefully, with his person beside him. A wave of tears moved through the staff and those outside the door, but it was not despair. It was gratitude, admiration, the kind of emotion reserved for heroes and the ones who love them. The hospital was full of stories, but none quite like this. A dog and his person, holding on until the very last moment, then letting go. Not with fear, but with reverence. Grace stayed until the room felt empty, until the world seemed to expand again, making space for grief and for all the ways love never truly leaves. She stood, swayed, caught herself on the edge of the table, and kissed Max's muzzle one last time. As she walked out, those who witnessed the goodbye stepped back, their faces shining, their hearts marked by what they'd seen. In the corridor, the night was deep, but it felt warm, lit from within by the legacy of two lives bound together. And in that hush, as Grace whispered a final thank you, the world seemed to pause, recognizing the quiet heroism of letting go with love. The room was quiet, heavy with the echo of final goodbyes. Grace lingered by Max's side, one hand still on his fur, her thumb tracing absent-minded circles into the old blanket. The world outside Willow Creek Veterinary Hospital faded to gray, the soft hush of rain, the distant hum of traffic, all muted and far away. She felt hollow and full at once. Grief sat on her chest like a weight, but beneath it was a welling sense of gratitude, of having witnessed something rare, something true. Max's body was still warm beneath her hand, but the spark that had lit his eyes for so many years was gone, as if he'd slipped into another room just out of sight, that tail wagging for her. On the other side, Grace let her breath slow. She didn't cry, not in the way she thought she might. Instead, a deep calm came over her, like the hush after a thunderstorm, or the moment the last fire was out and she could stand, boots heavy with ash, in the pale light of dawn. Vince stepped softly into the room, his face wet, but his movements careful. He knelt beside his sister, one arm around her shoulders, and they sat together, wordless, in the glow of the overhead light. Daniel joined them, standing a step back, his hands clasped and head bowed, sharing the silence. The staff hovered, their presence gentle, eyes red, voices hushed. Jordan fetched a glass of water for Grace, pressing it into her palm. "Take your time," she murmured. "No, we're not in any rush." Grace nodded, managing a smile of thanks. She sipped, then set the glass down on the counter, her attention still on Max. "He always waited for me," she said, voice thin but sure. Even when I was late coming home, he'd just wait." Vince squeezed her shoulder. "He always knew you'd come back." Grace's eyelids grew heavy. She leaned into Vince's side, her breath slow, her body drained. The pain that had gnawed at her for months had receded, replaced by a profound fatigue. Soft, enveloping, not frightening. She let herself sink into it, trusting it, the way she'd once trusted Max to pull her from smoke and flames. She murmured, almost to herself, "I'm tired, Vinny. So tired." He drew her closer, tears streaming down his cheeks. "It's okay, Grace. You did good. You did more than good." Outside, the rain picked up again, a gentle lullaby tapping at the windows. Dr. Larson came in, saw the tableau. Grace slumped against her brother, Max's body cradled beneath her hand, and understood. He met Jordan's eyes, and she nodded. It was time. Grace's vision blurred, the room shimmering around the edges. She tried to focus on Max's face, memorizing every detail, the curve of his ears, the patch of gray at his chin, the way his eyes had always found hers in the dark. She felt her heart slowing, her limbs growing light. For a heartbeat, she was back in the firehouse, young and strong, Max at her side, laughter and shouts ringing through the hall. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and coffee, her boots pounding on the tile. She remembered feeling invincible, fearless, her whole life stretching ahead, with Max as her shadow and her shield. But time moved differently now. It gathered itself in the quiet, in the hush after loss, in the gentle fall of her own breath. She let herself rest, let herself be held by Vince and by memory. Daniel fetched a firehouse blanket from the supply closet, one of the old ones, faded but clean, and gently laid it over Grace and Max, tucking them in together. The gesture was simple, but the meaning was deep. No one should leave this world alone, not after a life spent in service and in love. Dr. Larson checked Grace's vitals, her pulse weak but steady, her breathing slowing with every passing minute. He touched her hand, offering silent comfort, his own heart heavy. He'd seen plenty of goodbyes, but this one would haunt him, a bittersweet ache in his chest. Grace drew in one last breath, the room spinning softly, her pain finally lifting. She felt Max's warmth beneath her hand, and in her mind's eye she saw him waiting for her. Tail wagging, ears perked, ready for the next adventure. She exhaled. The silence deepened. Her hand slipped from Max's fur, coming to rest beside his paw. Vince felt her body go slack, her weight leaning fully into him. He let out a shuddering sigh, tears streaming as he pressed his lips to her hair. "Go easy, Gracie. Go with him." Daniel bowed his head, eyes closed. Dr. Larson checked Grace's pulse, holding her wrist with hands that trembled. He felt the last beat flutter and fade, like the dying echo of a bell. He stood back, voice quiet but certain. "She's gone. Gentle. No pain." Her hand never left him. The staff bowed their heads, honoring the moment. Jordan wept openly, wiping her face on her sleeve. Lucas crossed himself, whispering a prayer for them both. Vince stayed by his sister, rocking her gently, not ready to let go. Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. Silent solidarity. No one rushed, no one hurried them along. In that room, time was allowed to stretch, to give space for grief, for love, for the sacredness of a passing shared. Eventually, Vince stood, brushing Grace's hair from her face, straightening her blanket. He leaned over, kissed her forehead, then kissed Max's nose. "You two, you did it. You stayed together, just like you always promised." The staff prepared the room quietly, moving with reverence, never disturbing the peace that hung like a benediction over Grace and Max. Dr. Larson turned off the machines, drew the curtain, and let them rest. Outside, word spread through the hospital. Fire captain and her dog, gone within minutes of each other, hand in paw. The story moved through the halls, whispered in awe, carried by tears and soft laughter. No one who witnessed it would forget. Later, as dawn crept over Willow Creek, a gentle sun touched the hospital windows. Inside, beneath the firehouse blanket, Grace and Max lay side by side, at peace, together in rest as they had been in life. And in the hush that followed, the staff and family and friends all knew, deep in their bones, that some bonds are too strong for time or even death to break. Some stories do not end, they simply change form, written in the hearts of everyone who bears witness. Morning in Willow Creek came slow and gentle, the clouds breaking apart in streaks of gold and gray. The town woke to news that spread in whispers first, then grew louder as neighbors called one another, as shopkeepers set out their signs, as parents packed lunches for children. "Did you hear?" they asked, voices hushed with awe. "Grace Sullivan and her old German shepherd, they're gone, went together, minutes apart, just like that." At Station 14, the old firehouse with its peeling red doors and the faded mural of the town's first engine, the flag flew at half-mast. A pair of boots stood on the steps, a silent tribute to the captain who'd worn them out, walking the line between danger and safety. Flowers appeared by noon. Bouquets of wildflowers, sunflowers in coffee cans, roses tied with ribbons, all piled beneath the windows where Max used to nap in the morning sun. News crews came, gentle and respectful, their voices quieter than usual as they interviewed Vince and Daniel as they spoke with Jordan and Dr. Larson. The hospital released a simple statement. "Last night, we bore witness to the passing of two heroes. They left this world as they lived in it. Together, loyal, brave. We were honored to care for them." By midday, local papers ran headlines that felt both surreal and right. K9 and Fire Captain die minutes apart. Town mourns, remembers, social media filled with photos, Grace in her turnout gear, Max's tongue lolling beside her, the two of them standing in front of smoldering houses or walking in the 4th of July parade, Max bedecked in a red bandana. Old crew members posted stories about Grace's stubborn courage, her sharp laugh, the way Max would howl whenever he heard a siren, eager for another adventure. Children brought hand-drawn cards to the station, pictures of fire trucks and dogs with shining eyes. An older woman from Maplewood Hospice left a tray of cinnamon rolls at the hospital, whispering, "They saved my boy once, the both of them, or all of them, they never asked for thanks." Plans for a public memorial began almost as soon as the news broke. The mayor called a town meeting in the square, and it seemed the whole community came. Firefighters in uniform, nurses from the hospital, families and their pets. The sun was warm on their shoulders, and everywhere you looked, there was someone with tears in their eyes and a story to share. A hush fell as Vince, hands trembling, stepped to the podium. He spoke not of death, but of loyalty, of courage and legacy, of the way his sister and her dog had taught the town that real love isn't loud or showy. It's showing up again and again through storm and fire and the long silence afterward. Then Daniel spoke, his voice breaking but steady. "She was my captain, and Max was my partner too. They didn't just save lives, they saved hope for all of us." The centerpiece of the memorial was revealed that afternoon. In front of Station 14, workers set a bronze statue on a low stone pedestal. The town had voted for the design. Grace kneeling, her hand outstretched, Max at her side, head lifted, gaze fixed on hers. The sculptor had captured them perfectly, not as legends, but as they'd always been. A woman and her dog, leaning on each other, a quiet promise cast in metal. Children gathered around the statue, hands pressed to the cool bronze, whispering their own stories. A firefighter saluted, eyes shining. The air rang with the sound of the old station bell, rung once for Grace, once for Max, then once more. For every bond that had ever changed a life. For weeks people brought offerings, leashes, tennis balls, polished fire badges, faded photos, handwritten notes. The statue became a place for reflection, a landmark for all who needed reminding that love and service never really end. They only change shape. The legend of Grace and Max spread far beyond Willow Creek. Animal rescue organizations shared their story. Fire departments from other towns sent wreaths. Even strangers wrote letters, touched by the tale of a woman who wouldn't quit and the dog who waited for her at the edge of everything. In the evenings, as the sun set behind the firehouse, the statue caught the last light, casting a long shadow across the square. Vince liked to visit at dusk, sitting on the steps and talking to his sister as if she might answer. Sometimes he swore he could feel Max at his feet, a warm weight pressing against his legs, steady as ever. At home, Grace's boots and Max's old leash hung side by the door. Vince kept them there, a reminder that neither one ever truly left the other behind. Sometimes, in the hush of early morning, he'd imagine hearing the jingle of tags, the thump of a tail, his sister's laugh echoing down the hallway. The town carried on, but it was changed. Little things, an extra bowl left out for a stray, a neighbor helping another across a busy street, a child bravely pulling a frightened puppy from a ditch, felt imbued with more meaning. Everyone seemed to walk a little taller, speak a little kinder, hold their loved ones closer. On the anniversary of their passing, the entire town gathered in the square, candles flickering beneath the statue. Vince spoke again, reminding everyone, love like that doesn't end. It just changes form. It becomes memory and kindness and courage in someone else's hands. It's the story we tell our children, the reason we step up when it's hard. That's the legacy Grace and Max left us. As the candles burned low and the night grew quiet, a gentle breeze swept through, carrying the scent of rain and cut grass. For a moment, everyone seemed to feel it. That presence, that bond, alive in the hush. And for those who listened, a final message echoed as if carried on the wind. If the story touched you, follow us for more stories of loyalty, legacy, and lives that never let go. Let their memory remind you, no act of love is ever wasted, and some bonds never break.